Hello guys and welcome back to Leah's Lifestyle. We're at it again, finishing part 2 of Berkshire Hathaway Letters to Shareholders 1988. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it and get it done. Marketable securities. In selecting marketable securities for our insurance companies, we can choose among 5 major categories. 1. Long-term stock investments. 2. Medium-term fixed income securities. 3. Long-term fixed income securities. 4. Short-term cash equivalents. And 5. Short-term arbitrage commitments. We have no particular bias when it comes to choosing from these categories. We just continuously search among them for the highest after-tax returns as measured by, quote, mathematical expectations, end quote. Limiting ourselves always to investment alternatives we think we understand. Our criteria have nothing to do with maximizing immediate reportable earnings. Our goal, rather, is to maximize eventual net worth. Below, we list our common stock holdings having a value over $100 million, not including arbitrage commitments, which we will discuss later. A small portion of these investments belong to subsidiaries, of which Berkshire owns less than 100%. Of course, it has Capital Cities, the Coca-Cola Company, Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation Preferred, Geico Corporation, the Washington Post companies, and it has how much they are, their cost, and their marketability. Our permanent holdings, Capital Cities, ABC Inc., Geico Corporation, and the Washington Post Company, remain unchanged. Also unchanged is our uniqualified admiration of their managements. Tom Murphy and Dan Burke to Cap Sites, Bill Seidner and Louis Simpson to Geico, and Kay Graham and Dick Simmons at the Washington Post. Charlie and I appreciate enormously the talent and integrity these managers bring to their businesses. Their performance, which we have observed at close range, contrasts vividly with that of many CEOs which have fortunately observed from the safe distance. Sometimes these CEOs clearly do not belong in their jobs. Their positions, nevertheless, are usually secure. The supreme irony of business management is that it is far easier for an inadequate CEO to keep his job than it is for an inadequate subordinate. If a security, say, is hiring for a job that requires typing ability of at least 80 words per minute and turns out to be capable of only 50 words per minute, she will lose. Oh, it's a secretary. I said security, sorry. She will lose her job in no time. There is a logical standard for this job. Performance is easily measured, and if you can't make the grade, you're out. Similarly, if new salespeople fail to generate sufficient business quickly enough, they will be let go. Excuses will not be accepted as a substitute for orders. However, a CEO who doesn't perform is frequently carried indefinitely. One reason is that performance standards for his job seldom exist. When they do, they are often fuzzy or they may be waived or explained away, even when the performance shortfalls are major and repeated. In too many companies, the boss shoots the arrow of managerial performance and then hastily paints the bullseye around the spot where it lands. Another important but seldom recognized distinction between the boss and the foot soldiers is that the CEO has no immediate superior whose performance is itself getting measured. The sales managers who retain a bunch of lemons in the sales force will soon be in hot water himself. It is in his inadequate self-interest to promptly weed out his hiring mistakes. Otherwise, he himself may be weeded out. An office manager who has hired inept secretaries faces the same imperative, but the CEO's boss is a board of directors that seldom measures itself, and it's infrequently held to account for substandard corporate performance. If the board makes a mistake in hiring and perpetrates that mistake, so what? Even if the company is taken over because of the mistake, the deal will probably bestow substantial benefits on the outgoing board members. The bigger they are, the softer they fall. Finally, relations between the board and the CEO are expected to be congenial. At board meetings, criticism of the CEO's performance is often viewed as the social equivalent of belching. No such inhibitions restrained the office manager from critically evaluating the substandard typist. These points should not be interpreted as a blanket condemnation of CEOs or boards of directors. Most are able and hardworking, and a number are truly outstanding. But the management failing that Charlie and I have seen make us thankful that we are linked with the managers of 3 permanent holdings. They love their businesses, they think like owners, and they exude integrity and ability. In 1988, we made major purchases of Federal Home Loan Mortgage (PFD), Freddie Mac, and Coca-Cola. We expect to hold these securities for a long time. In fact, when we own portions of these outstanding businesses with outstanding management, our favorite holding period is forever. We are just the opposite of those who hurry to sell and book profits when companies perform well, but who tenaciously hang on to businesses that disappoint. Peter Lynch aptly likes such behaviors too, cutting the flowers and watering the weeds. Our holdings of Freddie Mac are the maximum allowed by law and are extensively described by Charlie in his letter. In our consolidated balance sheet, these shares are carried at cost rather than market, since they are owned by Mutual Savings and Loans, a non-insurance subsidiary. We continue to concentrate our investments in very few companies that we try to understand well. There are only a handful of businesses about which we have strong long-term convictions. Therefore, we have found such a business. Therefore, when we find such a business, we want to participate in a meaningful way. We agree with Mae West, quote, "Too much of a good thing can be wonderful," end quote. We reduced our holdings of medium-term tax-exempt bonds by about $100 million last year. All of the bonds sold were acquired after August 7, 1986. When such bonds are held by property casualty insurance companies, 15% of the tax-exempt interest earned is subject to tax. The $800 million position we still hold consists The $800 million position we still hold consists almost entirely of bonds, quote unquote, grandfathered under the Tax Reform Act of 1986, which means they are entirely tax exempt. Our sales produced a small profit, and our remaining bonds, which have an average maturity of about 6 years, are worth modestly more than the carrying value. Last year, we described our holdings of short-term and intermediate-term bonds of Texaco, which was then in bankruptcy. During 1988, we sold particularly all of these bonds at a pre-tax profit of about $22 million. The sale explains close to $100 million of the reduction in fixed income securities on our balance sheet. We also told you last year about our holdings of another security whose predominant characteristics are those of the intermediate fixed income issues. Our $700 million position in Salmon Inc. 9% convertible preferred. This preferred has a sinking fund that will retire in equal annual installments from 1995 to 1999. Berkshire carries this holding at cost. For a reason discussed by Charlie on page 69, the estimate market value of our holdings has improved from moderately under cost at the end of last year to moderately over cost at 1988 year end. The close association we have had with John Gutfried, CEO of Salmon, during the past year has reinforced our admiration for him, but we continue to have no great insight about the near, intermediate, or long-term economics of the investment banking business. This is not an industry in which it is easy to forecast future levels of profitability. We continue to believe that our conversion privilege could help could well have important value over the life of our preferred. However, the overwhelming portion of the preferred's value resides in its fixed income characteristics, not its equity characteristics. We have not lost our aversion to long-term bonds. We will become enthused about such securities only when we become enthused about prospects for long-term stability in these purchasing powers of money. And that kind of stability isn't in the cards. Both society and elect officials simply have too many higher ranking priorities that conflict with purchasing power stability. The only long term bonds we hold are those of Washington Public Power Supply Systems, WPPSS. A few of our WPPSS bonds have short maturities, and many others, because of their high coupons, are likely to be refunded and paid off in a few years. Overall, our WPPSS holdings are carried on our balance sheet at $247 million dollars and have a market value of about $352 million. Dollars. We explained the reason for our WPPS purchases in the 1983 annual report and are pleased to tell you that this commitment has worked out about as expected. At the time of purchase, most of our bonds were yielding around 17% after taxes and carried no ratings, which had been suspended. Recently, the bonds were rated AA negative by Standard & Poor's. They now sell at levels only slightly below those enjoyed by top-graded credits. In 1983 report, we compared the economics of our WPPSS purchase to those involved in buying a business. As it turned out, this purchase actually worked out better than it did the general run of businesses acquisitions made in 1983, assuming both are measured on the basis of unleveraged after-tax returns achieved through 1988. Our WPPSS experience, though pleasant, does nothing to alter our negative opinions about long-term bonds. It only makes us hope that we run into some other large stigmatic issue whose troubles have caused it to be significantly mispraised by the market. Arbitrage. In past reports, we have told you that our insurance subsidiaries sometimes engage in arbitrage as an alternative to holding short-term cash equivalents. We refer, of course, to make major long-term commitments, but we often have more cash than good ideas. At such times, arbitrage sometimes promises much greater returns than treasury bills and, equally important, cools any temptation we may have to relax our standards for long-term investments. Charlie's sign off after we've talked about an arbitrage commitment is usually, quote, okay, at least it will keep you out of the bars, end quote. During 1988, we made unusually large profits from arbitrage, measured both by absolute dollars and rate of return. Our pre-tax gain was $78 million on average investment funds of about $147 million. This level of activity makes some detailed decision of arbitrage and our approach to it appropriate. Once, the world applied only to the simulation of purchase and sale of securities for foreign exchange in two different markets. The goal was to exploit tiny price differentials that might exist between, say, Royal Dutch stock trading in guilders in Amsterdam, pounds in London, and dollars in New York. Some people might call this scalping. It won't surprise you that practitioners opted for the French term arbitrage. Since World War I, the definition of arbitrage, or quote-unquote risk arbitrage, as it is now sometimes called, has expanded to include the pursuit of profits from an announced corporation, even such as sales of the company, merger, recapitalization, reorganization, liquidation, self-tender, etc. In most cases, the arbitrager expects to profit regardless of the behavior of the stock market. The major risk he usually faces instead is that the announced event won't happen. Some offbeat opportunities occasionally arise in the arbitrage field. I participated in one of these when I was 24 and worked in New York for Graham Newman Corp. Rockwood & Co., a Brooklyn-based chocolate products company of limited profitability, had adopted LIFO inventory valuations. In 1941, when Coca-Cola was selling for $5 per pound, in 1954, a temporary shortage of Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola, wait, I said Coca-Cola. I did not mean Coca-Cola. Cocoa, like the chocolate seed. When Coca-Cola was selling for 5 cents per pound, in 1954, a temporary shortage of Coca-Cola caused the price to soar over 60 cents. Consequently, Rockwood wished to unload its valuable inventory quickly before the price dropped. But if the Coca-Cola had simply been sold off, the company would have owned close to 50% tax on the proceeds. The 1954 tax code came to the rescue. It contained an arcane provision that eliminated the tax otherwise due to LIFO profits of inventory if inventory was distributed to shareholders as part of a plan reducing the scope of a corporation's business. Rockwood decided to terminate one of its businesses, the sale of Coca-Cola butter, and said 13 million pounds of its Coca-Cola bean inventory was arbitraged to that activity. Accordingly, the company offered to repurchase its stock in exchange for the Coca-Cola beans it no longer needed, paying 80 pounds of beans for each share. For several weeks, I busily bought shares, sold beans, and made periodic stops at Scorereader Schroeder Trust to exchange stock certificates for warehouse receipts. The profits were good, and my only expense was subway tokens. The architect of Rockwood's restructuring was an unknown, but brilliant Chicagoan J. Pritzker, then 32. If you're familiar with Jay's subsequent record, you won't be surprised to hear the action worked out rather well for Rockwood's continuous shareholders also. From shortly before the tender until shortly after, Rockwood stock appreciated from 15 to 100, even though the company was experiencing large operation losses. Sometimes there is more to stock valuation than price-earning ratios. In recent years, most arbitrage operations have involved takeovers, friendly and unfriendly, with acquisition fever rampant, with antitrust challenges almost non-existent, and with bids often ratcheting upward. Arbitrageurs have prospered mightily. They have not needed special talents to do well. They trick a la Peter Sellers in the movie was simply has simply been, quote, being there, end quote, in Wall Street. The old proverb has been reworded, quote, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach him how to arbitrage and you feed him forever, end quote. If, however, he studied at the Ivan Boesky School of Arbitrage, it may be a state institution that supplies his meal. To evaluate arbitrage situations, you must answer 4 questions. 1. How likely is it that the promised event will indeed occur? 2. How long will your money be tied up? 3. What chance is there that something still better will transpire? A competing takeover bid, for example? And 4. What will happen if the event does not take place because of antitrust action, financial glitches, etc.? Artacorp, one of our more serendipitous arbitrage experiences, illustrated the twists and turns of the business. On September 28, 1981, the directors of Arca, Arca, Arcata agreed in principle to sell the company to Kohlberg, Kravis, Roberts and Co. (KKR). Then and now a major lever average buy-out firm. Arcata was the printing and forest productions business and had one other thing going for it. In 1978, the U.S. government had taken title to 10,700 acres of Arcata timber, primarily old-growth redwood, to expand Redwood National Park. The government had paid $97.9 million in several installments for the acreage, a sum Arcata was contesting as grossly inadequate. The parties also disputed the interest rate that should apply to the period between the taking of the property and the final payment for it. The enabling legislation stipulated 6% simple interest. Arcata argued for a much higher and compounded rate. Buying a company with a highly speculative, large-sized claim in litigation creates a negotiation problem. Whether the claim is on behalf of or against the company, to solve this problem, KKR offered $37 per Argata share plus two-thirds of any additional amounts paid by the government for the Redwood lands. Appraising this arbitrage opportunity, we had to ask ourselves whether KKR would consummate the transaction since, among other things, its offer was contingent upon its ob- obtaining quote unquote satisfactory financing. A clause of this kind of always dangerous for the seller. It offers an easy exit for a suitor whose ar- ardor fades between proposal and marriage. However, we are not particularly worried about this possibility because KKR's past record for closing had been good. We also had to ask ourselves what would happen if the KKR deal did fall through, and here we also felt reasonably comfortable. Arcata's management and directors had been shopping the company for some time and were clearly determined to sell. If KKR went away, Arcata would likely find another buyer, though of course the price might be lower. Finally, we had to ask ourselves what the redwood claim might be worth. Your chairman, who can't tell an elm from an oak, had no trouble with that one. He coolly evaluated the claim at somewhere between zero and a whole lot. We started buying Arcata stock then around $33.50 on September 30th, and in 8 weeks purchased about 400,000 shares, or 5% of the company. The initial announcement said that the $37 would be paid in January 1982. Therefore, if everything had gone perfectly, we would have achieved an annual rate of return of about 40%, not counting the redwood claim, which would have been frosting. All did not go perfectly. In December, it was announced that the closing would be delayed a bit. Nevertheless, a definite agreement was signed on January 4th. Encouraged, we raised our stake, buying it at around $38 per share and increasing our holdings to 655,000 shares, or over 7% of the company. Our willingness to pay, even though the closing had been postponed, reflected our leaning towards a quote unquote a whole lot rather than zero for the redwoods. Then, on February 25th, the lenders said they were taking a quote unquote second look at financing terms. Quote, in view of the several depressed housing industry and its impact on Arcata's outlook, end quote. The stockholders meeting was postponed again to April. An Arcata spokesman said he, quote, did not think the fate of the acquisition itself was in peril, end quote. When arbitrageurs hear such reassurance, their minds flash to the old saying, quote, he lied like a finance minister on the eve of devaluation, end quote. On March 12th, KKR said its earlier deal wouldn't work, first cutting its offer to $33.50, then 2 days later raising it to $35. On March 15th, however, the directors turned this bid down and accepted another group's offer for $37.50, plus one half of any redwood recovered. The shareholders okayed this deal, and the $37.50 was paid on June 4th. We received $24.6 million versus our cost of $22.9 million. Our average holding period was close to 6 months. Considering the trouble this transaction incurred, our 15% annual rate of return, excluding any value for the redwood claim, was more than satisfactory. The best was yet to come. The trial judge appointed two commissions, one to look at the timber's value, the other to consider the interest rate questions. In January 1987, the first commission said the redwoods were worth $275.7 million. and the second commission recommended a compounded blended rate of return working out to about 14%. In August 1987, the judge upheld these conclusions, which met a net amount of about 600 million would be arcata. The government then appealed. In 1988, though, before this appeal was heard, the claim was settled for $519 million. Consequently, we received an additional $29.48 per share, or about $19.3 million. We will get another 800,000 or so in 1989. Berkshire's arbitrage activities differ from those many arbitrageurs. First, we participated in only a few and usually very large transactions each year. Most practitioners buy into a great many deals, perhaps 50 or more per year. With that many irons in the fire, they must spend most of their time monitoring both the progress of deals and the market movement of the related stocks. This is not how Charlie nor I wish to spend our lives. What's the sense in getting rich just to stare at a ticker tape all day? Because we diversified so little, one particularly profitable or unprofitable transaction will affect our yearly results from arbitrage far more than it will the typical arbitrage operation. So far, Berkshire has not had a really bad experience, but we will, and when it happens, we'll report the glory details to you. The other way we differ from some arbitrage operations is that we participate only in transactions that have been publicly announced. We do not trade on rumors, or try to guess takeover candidates. We just read the newspaper, think about a few of the big propositions, and go by our own sense of probabilities. At year end, our only major arbitrage position was 3,342,000 shares of RJR Nabasco with a cost of 281.8 million and a market value of 304.5 million. In January, we increased our holdings to roughly 4 million shares, and in February, we eliminated our position. About 3 million shares were accepted when we tendered our holdings to KKR, which acquired RJR, and the returned shares were promptly sold in the market. Our pre-tax profit was better than expected, $64 million. Earlier, another familiar face turned up in the RJR bidding contest, Jay Pritzker, who was a part of the first Boston group that made a tax-oriented offer. Quote, Yogi Berra, quote, it was deja vu all over again, end quote. During most of the time when we normally would have been purchasers of RJR, our activities in stock were restricted because of Solomon's participation in the bidding group. Customarily, Charlie and I, though we are directors of Solomon, are walled off from information about its merger and acquisitions work. We have asked that it be that way. The information would do us no good and could, in fact, occasionally inhibit Berkshire's arbitrage operations. However, the unusual large commitment that Solomon proposed to make in the RJR deal required that all directors be fully informed and involved. Therefore, Berkshire's purchase of the RJR were made at only two times. First, in the few days immediately following management's announcement of buyout plans before Solomon became involved, and considerably later after the RJR board made its decision in favor of KKR. Because we could not buy at other times, our directorships cost Berkshire significant money. Considering Berkshire's good results in 1988, you might accept us to pile into arbitrage during 1989. Instead, we expect to be on the sidelines. The pleasant reason is that our cash holdings are down, because our position in equities that we expect to hold for a very long time is substantially up. We regularly, as regular readers of this report know, our new commitments are not based on a judgment about short-term prospects for the stock market. Rather, they reflect the opinions about long-term business prospects for specific companies. We do not have, never have had, and never will have an opinion about where the stock market, interest rates, or business activities will be in a year from now. Even if we had a lot of cash, we probably would do little in arbitrage in 1989. Some extraordinary excess have developed in the takeover field, as Dorothy says, quote, Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore, end quote. We have no idea how long the excess will last, nor do we know what will change the attitudes of government, lenders, and buyers that fuel them. But we do know that the less the prudence with which others conduct their affairs, the greater the prudence with which we should conduct our own affairs. We have no desire to arbitrage transactions that reflect the unbridled and, in our view, often unwarranted op- optimism of both buyers and lenders. In our activities, we will heed this wisdom of Herb Stein: if something can't go on forever, it will end. Alexa, stop. Efficient market theory. The preceding discussions about arbitrage make a small discussion of, quote, effective market theory, end quote, EMT, also seem relevant. This doctrine became highly fashionable, indeed, almost holy scripture in academic circles during the 1970s. Essentially, it said that analyzing stock was useless because all the public information about them was appropriately reflected in their prices. In other words, the market always knew everything. As a corollary, the corollary, corollary, corollary. I don't know. I have to look that word up. The professors who taught EMTs said that someone throwing darts at the stock table could select a stock portfolio having prospects just as good as one selected by the brightest, most hard-working secretary analysis. Amazingly, EMT was embraced not only by academics, but by many investment professionals and corporate managers as well. Observing correctly that the market was frequently efficient, they went on to conclude incorrectly that it was always efficient. The difference between these positions is night and day. In my opinion, the continuous 63-year arbitrage experience of Graham Newman Court, Buffett Partnership, and Berkshire illustrates just how foolish EMT is. There's plenty of other evidence also. While at Graham Newman, I made a study of its earnings from arbitrage during the entire 1926 to 1956 lifespan of the company. Unleveraged returns averaged 20% per year starting at 1956. I applied Ben Graham's arbitrage principles first at Buffett Partnership and then Berkshire. Though I have not made an exact calculation, I have done enough work to know that 1956 to 1988 returns averaged well over 20%. Of course, I operate in an environment far more favorable than Ben's. He had 1929 to 1932 to contend with. All of the conditions are present that are required for a fair test of portfolio performance. 1. The three organizations traded hundreds of different securities while building this 63-year record. 2. The results are not skewed by a few fortunate experiences. 3. We did not have to dig for obscure facts or develop keen insight about products or management. We simply acted on highly publicized events, and 4. Our arbitrage positions were a clearly identified universe. They were not they have not been selected by hand sight. Over the 63 years, the general market delivered just under a 10% annual return, including dividends. This means $1,000 would have grown to $405,000 if all income had been reinvested. A 20% rate of return, however, would have produced $97 million. That strikes us as a statistically significant differential then that might conceivably arouse one's curiosity. Yet, proponents of the theory have never seemed interested in discordant evidence of this type. True, they don't talk quite as much about their theory today as they used to, but no one, to my knowledge, has ever said he was wrong, no matter how many thousands of students he has sent forth misinstructed. EMT, moreover, continues to be an integral part of the investment curriculum at major business schools. Apparently, a reluctance to recant and thereby demystify the priesthood is not limited to theologians. Naturally, the disservice done students and gullible investment professionals who have swallowed EMT has been an extraordinary service to us and other followers of Graham. In any sort of contest, financial, mental, or physical, it's an enormous advantage to have opponents who have been taught that it's useless to even try. From a selfish point of view, Graham Minutes should probably endow chairs to ensure the perpetual teaching of EMT. All this said, the warning is appropriate. Arbitrage has looked easy recently, but this is not a form of investing that guarantees profits of 20% a year or, for that matter, profits of any kind. As noted, the market is reasonably efficient much of the time. For every arbitrage opportunity we seized in the 63-year period, many more were foregone because they seemed properly priced. An investor cannot obtain superior profits from stocks by simply committing to a specific investment category or style. He can earn them only by carefully evaluating facts and continuously exercising discipline. Investing in arbitrage situations, per se, is no better at strategy than selecting a portfolio by throwing darts. New York Stock Exchange listing. Berkshire shares are listed on the New York Stock Exchange on November 29, 1988. On page 50 to 51, we reproduced the letter we sent to shareholders concerning the listing. Let me clarify one point not dealt with in this letter. Though our round lot for trading on the NYSE is 10 shares, any number of shares from one on up can be bought or sold. As the letter explains, our primary goal as listing was to reduce transaction costs, and we believe this goal is being achieved. Generally, the spread between the bid and ask price on the NYSE has been well below the spread that prevailed in the over-the-counter market. Henderson's Brother, Inc., the specialist on our shares, is the oldest continuing specialist firm on the exchange. Its progenitor, William Thomas Henderson, bought his seat for $500 on September 8th in 1861. Recently, seats were selling for about $625,000. Among the 54 firms acting as specialists, HBI ranked second in number of stock assigned with 83. We were pleased when Berkshire was allocated to HBI and have been delighted with the firm's performance. Jim Margie, chairman of HBI, personally managed the trading in Berkshire, and we could not be in better hands. In two respects, our goals probably differ somewhat from those of most listing companies. First, we do not want to maximize the price at which Berkshire shares trade. We wish to instead for them to trade in a narrow range centered in intrinsic business value, which we hope increases at a reasonable, or better yet, unreasonable rate. Charlie and I are bothered as much by significant overvaluation as significant undervaluation. Both extremes will inevitably produce results for many shareholders that will differ sharply from Berkshire's business results. If our stock price instead continuously mirrors business value, each of our shareholders will receive an investment result that roughly parallels the business results of Berkshire during his holding period. Second, we wish for very little trading activities. If we ran a private business with a few passive partners, we would be disappointed if those partners and their replacement frequently wanted to leave the partnership. Running a public company, we feel the same way. Our goal is to attract long-term owners who, at the time of purchase, have no timetable or price target for a sale, but plan instead to stay with us indefinitely. We don't understand the CEO who wants lots of stock activity, for that can be achieved only if many of his owners are constantly exiting. At what other organizations, school, club, church, etc., do leaders cheer when members leave? However, if there were a broker whose livelihood depended upon the membership turnover in such organizations, you could be sure that there would be at least one proponent of activity, as in, quote, there hasn't been much going on in Christianity for a while. Maybe we should switch to Buddhism next week, end quote. Of course, some Berkshire owners will need or want to sell from time to time, and we wish for good replacements who will pay them a fair price. Therefore, we try, through our policies, performance, and communication, to attract new shareholders who understand our operations, share our time horizon, and measure us as we measure ourselves. If we can continue to attract this sort of shareholder and, just as important, can continue to be uninteresting to those with short term or unrealistic expectations, Berkshire should consistently sell at prices reasonably related to business value. David L. Dodd. David Dodd, my friend and teacher for 38 years, died last year at age 93. Most of you don't know him, yet any long-term shareholder of Berkshire is appreciably wealthier because of his indirect influence he had upon our company. Dave spent a lifetime teaching at Columbus University, and he co-authored security analysis with Ben Graham from the moment I arrived at Columbia. Dave personally encouraged and educated me. One influence was as important as the other. Everything he taught me, directly or through his book, made sense. Later, through dozens of letters, he continued my education right up until his death. I have known many professionals of finance and investments, but I have never seen any, except for Ben Graham, who was the match of Dave. The proof of his talent is the record of his students. No other teacher of investment has sent forth so many who have achieved unusual success. When students left Dave's classroom, they were equipped to invest intelligently for a lifetime because the principles he taught were simple, sound, useful, and enduring. Though these may appear to be unremarkable virtues, the teaching of principles embodied them has been rare. It's particularly impressive that Dave could practice as well as preach. Just as Keynes became wealthy by applying his academic ideas to a very small purse, so, too, did Dave. Indeed, his financial performance far outshone that of Keynes, who began as a market timer, leaning on business and credit cycle theory, and converted after much thought to value investing. Dave was right from the start. In Berkshire's investment, Charlie and I have employed the principle taught by Dave and Ben Graham. Our prosperity is the future of their intellectual tree. Miscellaneous. We hope to buy more businesses that are similar to the ones we have, and we can use some help. If you have businesses that fits the following criteria, call me, or preferably write. Here's what we're looking for: large purchases, demonstrated constant earning power, business earning good returns on equity while employing little or no debt, management in place, simple businesses, and offering price. We will not engage in unfairly takeovers. We can promise complete confidentiality and a very fast answer, customarily within 5 minutes, as to whether interested. We prefer to buy for cash, but will consider issuing stock, and we receive as much intrinsic business value as we give. Our favorite form of purchase is one fitting the Blumkin Fred Meyer Heldem mold. In cases like these, the company's owners and managers wish to generate significant amounts of cash, sometimes for themselves, but often for the families are inactive shareholders. However, these managers also wish to remain significant owners who continue to run their companies just as they have in the past. We think we offer particularly good fit for owners with these objectives and invite potential sellers to check us out by contacting people with whom we have done business in the past. Charlie and I frequently get approached about acquisitions that don't come close to meeting our tests. We found that if you advertise the interest in buying collies, a lot of people still call hoping to sell you their Cocker Spaniels. The collies. People, their Cocker Spaniels. Oh God. Our interest in new ventures, turnarounds, or actions like sales can best be expressed by another Goldwyn's quote, please include me out, end quote. Besides being interested in the purchase of businesses as described above, we are also interested in negotiating purchases of large but not controlling blocks of stock comparable to those we hold in Cap Cities and Solomon. We have a special interest in purchasing convertible prefers as long-term investments as we did in Solomon. We received some good news a few weeks ago. Standard & Poor's raised our credit rating to AAA, which is the highest rate it bestows. Only 15 other U.S. industrial or property casualty companies are rated AAA, down from 28 to 9, down from 28 in 1980. Corporate bondholders have taken their lumps in the last few years from quote-unquote event risks. This term refers to the overnight degradation of credit that accompanies a heavily leveraged purchase or recapitalization of businesses whose financial policies, up to them, have been conservative. In a world of takeovers inhabited by a few owner-managers, most corporations present such a risk. Berkshire does not. Charlie and I promise bondholders the same respect we afford shareholders. About 97.4% of all eligible shares participated in Berkshire in 1988 shareholders designated contribution program. Contributions made through the program were 5 million and 2,319 charities were recipients. If we achieve reasonable business results, we plan to increase the per share contribution in 1989. We urge new shareholders to read the description of our shareholder design contribution program that appears on pages 48 to 49. If you wish to participate in future programs, we strongly urge that you immediately make your shares, and then they talk about making sure that your shares are in your name and not anywhere else. Berkshire's annual meeting will be held in Omaha on Monday, April 24th, 1989, and I hope you'll come. The meeting provides the forum for you to ask any owner-related questions you may have, and we will keep answering until all, except those dealing with portfolio activities or other proprietary information, have been dealt with. After the meeting, we will have several buses available to take you to visit Mrs. B's at the Nebraska Furniture Mart and Ike Fredman's at Board